darkness. Greenvale was a picture-perfect suburban town, a place where families flourished and the streets were filled with laughter. But beneath its serene surface, a darkness lurked, one that had gripped the community in fear for months. A serial killer, known as the Artisan, had been terrorizing the city, leaving behind grotesque displays of mutilated bodies posed like works of art. Women and children were his targets, and despite the efforts of law enforcement, he had managed to slip through their grasp time and time again. For the Miller family, life in Greenvale had always been peaceful. James Miller, a dedicated businessman, often traveled for work, leaving his wife, Sarah, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, to manage their daily routines. It wasn't an ideal arrangement, but Sarah had grown accustomed to his frequent absences, and Lily doted on her father whenever he was home. It was a Thursday morning when James packed his suitcase for yet another business trip. Standing at the front door, he hugged Lily tightly before turning to Sarah. "I'll be back in a week," he said with that familiar, reassuring smile. "You two take care of each other, okay?" Sarah forced a smile, nudging him toward the car. "We always do. Go on. You'll miss your flight." With a wave, James disappeared down the driveway, leaving Sarah and Lily to settle into their routine. But neither of them could have anticipated that this trip would change their lives forever. The Watcher. The week began uneventfully. Mornings were spent rushing through breakfast and getting Lily to school. Afternoons were filled with work for Sarah and playdates for Lily. In the evenings they visited the local park, where Lily loved to climb the jungle gym and play hide and seek with her friends. It was during one of these evenings at the park that the Artisan spotted them, sitting on a bench. He observed them intently, his eyes following their every move. To anyone else, he was just another passerby, blending seamlessly into the background. But in his mind, he was already planning. He watched the way Sarah laughed as she pushed Lily on the swing, the way Lily's curls bounced as she ran around the playground. They were perfect, he thought, his next masterpiece. As Sarah and Lily left the park and walked home, the Artisan followed at a distance, his footsteps silent against the pavement. He lingered in the shadows outside their house, watching as they turned off the lights and went to bed. Over the next few days, he studied them, learning their schedules and routines. He was meticulous, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night it happened. It was a Tuesday night when the Artisan made his move. The Miller house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes with deep sleep. The Artisan crept through the shadows, his gloved hands deftly cutting the phone lines before slipping silently through an unlocked window. Inside, he moved with practiced precision. The first thing he did was steal Sarah's phone from the kitchen counter. He scrolled through her photos, pausing on images of her and Lily, their smiles radiant and full of life. A twisted grin spread across his face as he placed the phone in his pocket. Then, he turned on the television, letting its flickering light and muted sound fill the living room. Upstairs, Sarah stirred. The sudden noise pulled her from sleep, and she assumed it was Lily, perhaps unable to sleep and watching cartoons downstairs. Groggily, she got out of bed and descended the stairs, calling out softly, "Lily, sweetheart, what are you doing up?" When she reached the bottom step, she froze. The Artisan stood in the middle of the living room, his back to her, silhouetted by the glow of the television. Slowly, he turned to face her, his eyes glinting with malice. He smiled, a wide, chilling grin that sent a jolt of terror through Sarah. She gasped and bolted up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran straight to Lily's room, locking the door behind her. Lily woke up, confused and frightened, as Sarah pulled her close. "Mommy, what's happening?" Lily whimpered. "Shh, it's okay," Sarah whispered, though her voice shook. "We'll be okay." But they wouldn't. The Artisan was already at the door. The sound of wood splintering filled the room as he broke through. Sarah screamed, shielding Lily behind her, but it was no use. The Artisan was stronger, faster. Within moments, they were subdued, their wrists bound with rough rope. Sarah begged for mercy, tears streaming down her face, but the Artisan only laughed. The horror. For hours, the Miller home became a house of horrors. The Artisan tortured Sarah and Lily, savoring their screams and pleas. When it was over, he left their dismembered bodies carefully arranged in the living room. his art completed. But this time, in his arrogance, he made a mistake. In his rush to leave, he accidentally dropped a piece of evidence, a small, bloodied utility knife, on the floor near the couch. The investigation. When James returned home that Friday evening, he knew something was wrong the moment he stepped through the door. The house was eerily silent, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. He called out for Sarah and Lily, but there was no response. It wasn't until he entered the living room that he found them. The scene before him was a nightmare come to life. His wife and daughter, mutilated and posed, their lifeless eyes staring vacantly. James collapsed to his knees, his anguished scream echoing through the empty house. The police arrived within minutes of his frantic 911 call. Detectives combed through the house, documenting the gruesome scene. But it was the small utility knife, left carelessly behind, that would become the key to solving the case. Forensics found partial fingerprints on the handle, along with a trace of DNA. The hunt for the artisan. For months, the Greenvale Police Department had been chasing shadows, unable to identify the artisan. But now, they had a lead. The fingerprints matched a man named Victor Hale, a drifter with a long history of mental instability and minor run-ins with the law. Detectives tracked him to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of town. The raid was swift and decisive. When they stormed his room, they found Victor surrounded by disturbing sketches and photographs of his victims, including Sarah and Lily. He didn't resist arrest, instead smiling as if proud of his work. Justice served. The trial was a media sensation. Victor Hale, dubbed the Artisan by the press, showed no remorse as the evidence against him mounted. The prosecution presented the utility knife, the photographs, and Victor's own chilling confession. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. For James, the verdict brought a small measure of closure, but the pain of losing his family would never fade. He sold the house in Greenvale, unable to bear the memories it held, and moved to a new city to start over. But every night, he lit a candle for Sarah and Lily, vowing to honor their memory and never forget the love they brought into his life. Epilogue. Victor Hale spent the rest of his days in a maximum security prison, his art reduced to the confines of his own mind. The people of Greenvale slowly began to heal, their community no longer gripped by fear. But the scars left by the artisan would remain, a reminder of the darkness that once invaded their peaceful town. And for James Miller, life would never be the same. But he carried the strength of his wife and daughter with him, determined to live a life that honored their memory, even in the shadow of his grave.